Everyone thought he was just an ordinary security guard, until a little girl silently whispered a cry for help with her hands in front of the revolving door. In that moment, David's life changed irrevocably. A child's fearful gaze would pull him into snow-covered roads, bullets, and the heart of a mansion filled with secrets. And in the end, this silent hero wouldn't just save a life. He would rewrite his own destiny. True courage often doesn't start with just looking, but with seeing and taking action. David was a 35-year-old security guard, and his life had been shaken recently by a deep silence. Until a few months ago, he had a steady life. His house, where he lived with his wife and young daughter, was a sanctuary for him. But over time, the harmony between them disappeared. Arguments were replaced with silence. Eventually, both sides decided to separate to avoid further damage. Despite everything, David quietly left the house, maintaining respect for his ex-wife. What hurt the most was leaving his 5-year-old daughter. He was deeply attached to her, but he thought of her well-being. He didn't want her life to be turned upside down, so he left custody to her mother. This decision tore his heart apart every night. But he lived his inner battle without showing it to anyone, just so his daughter wouldn't be harmed. After the divorce, life had to start anew, and this new beginning was neither easy nor warm. With a limited budget, he found a small apartment. He promised himself that he would replant his hopes, squeezed within those four walls. Loneliness was heavy, but responsibility was even heavier. He had to do whatever it took to ensure his daughter wanted for nothing. She shouldn't lack toys or clothes. To do this, he needed to work harder and sleep less. When David looked for a job, he had one priority. The new place shouldn't be far from his home. He couldn't afford long trips or wasted time anymore. Eventually, he found a job as a security guard at one of the city's most luxurious shopping malls. This was a place filled with shiny storefronts, expensive brands, and flashy people. But for David, this glittering world was just a building where he had to clock in hours. Though he appeared like someone in a plain uniform, there were signs of another battle within him. When he started his new job, he took each step carefully. He was disciplined, silent, and cautious. He had to do his job well because there was a little heart waiting for him. Every day, he worked overtime, returning home late at night. He suppressed his exhaustion with a cup of tea, then looked over the small notebook where he wrote things for his daughter. That notebook was perhaps the first drafts of the stories he would one day tell her. David's life wasn't easy, but he was a hero quietly patrolling between luxury stores. Behind the shiny windows, he was the name of an unseen resistance. He might have been broken, but he wasn't exhausted, because his life was not about falling, but about getting back up every time he did. Winter had taken over the city with all its harshness. The streets were covered in snow, and piles of grayish snow had gathered along the curbs. As the sky looked down on the city with a leaden silence, people's footprints left a wet, heavy mark on the ground. The luxury shopping mall was decorated for the holiday season. A giant Christmas tree sparkled at the entrance, and with the melodies echoing through the interior, every corner dazzled in red and white. Light chains hanging from the glass ceilings seemed to turn night into day. However, the only feeling this glittering atmosphere awakened in David's heart was an aching emptiness. He knew he wouldn't be able to see his little girl this holiday season either. For most people, the holiday meant hugging loved ones and gathering around warm tables. But for David, it was the days when the reality of his daughter being far away became even more apparent. His little girl was growing up. She would soon start school, and David followed her growth only through a few pictures on his phone and the occasional short video calls. That's why every overtime shift was not just a source of income for him. It was a small brick in the future he was building for his daughter. He worked so she would receive a good education and have all her needs met. Every drop of sweat was a silent translation of the thousands of words running through his mind. He had woken up early. The cold apartment still hadn't warmed up completely, but David had gotten used to it by now. He went to the kitchen and made himself a coffee. Looking out the small kitchen window, he saw the snow falling silently. With his coffee cup in hand, he paused for a few seconds, lost in thought. Then he carefully put on his uniform, tied his boots, and buttoned his jacket. He gave a brief glance at the tired but determined man in the mirror before leaving the house. Outside, the air was wrapped in sharp cold. With every step, he left a mark in the snow, and his breath scattered as a thin mist in the air. When he reached the mall, the crowd hadn't yet reached its morning peak, but the holiday atmosphere inside had already taken over everything. At the entrance, children happily gazed at the decorations, and families were heading to the stores. David got to his post, adjusted his radio, and began scanning the crowd with his eyes. Today was going to be a long and busy day. He had to perform his duty without a second to spare among the people doing their holiday shopping. Everything seemed ordinary. The day was busy, but nothing out of the usual. The holiday season's excitement had brought crowds to the mall, people darting between stores with colorful bags, children laughing in front of the lit decorations. David had been assigned to the exit gate. People were smiling. The air was filled with the scent of chocolate and hot coffee. He was part of a crowd he didn't know, but was used to. As everyone hurried along, David was carrying out his duty with focus. But at that moment, someone in the crowd caught his attention. A little girl in a red coat was holding the hand of a man she seemed to think was her father. The girl had long, straight, blonde hair. David's heart nearly stopped. She reminded him of his own daughter. She must have been the same age, the same hair, the same walk. Even the little monkey toy she was holding resembled the old stuffed animal his daughter once never left behind. David couldn't take his eyes off the pair. They were heading toward the revolving door. Then, the little girl slowly turned her head back, as if looking for something, maybe hoping for something. And at that moment, their eyes met. Time stood still. The hum of the mall suddenly turned into silence in David's ears. There was something in the little girl's eyes, something familiar, an emptiness, a question mark, maybe even a call for help. Then, the girl dropped the toy monkey. Whether it was intentional or not, David couldn't tell, but something inside him urged him to act. As the snowflakes danced in the air, David quickly walked toward the revolving door. He picked up the toy from the ground and called out behind the pair, "Sir." Your little girl dropped her toy. The man paused when he heard the call. He turned his head. His coat looked expensive, like something David could never afford in his lifetime. With a cold posture and a serious expression, he looked at David. A fake smile appeared on his face, but his eyes were uneasy. From the outside, he appeared to be about 45 years old, well-groomed, but anxious. Then, he turned to the girl beside him and said, "Oh, thank you. Right, Mia?" Mia? Something stirred inside David. The girl reached out her small hands to pick up the toy. As she did, David noticed something on her wrist, a light-colored cotton child's brace. It was wrapped around her wrist, perhaps a result of an accident or maybe an illness. But what was most strange were her eyes. It was as if she wanted to say something. Her eyes carried an unspoken call. Finally, in a soft, high-pitched voice, she mumbled, "Thank you." David stood frozen. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Mia's. His heart was pounding. He felt an unexplainable sensation, a doubt, maybe even a connection, but he didn't know what it was yet. He just felt something wasn't right. And in that moment, for the second time in his life, time stopped. The little girl picked up the toy monkey from the ground and handed it to the man, holding his hand. She lowered her head, turned around without saying a word, and began to walk away. The man followed silently beside her. As they moved through the crowd, David stood frozen in place, unable to take his eyes off the two small shoulders. A feeling of unease was growing inside him. It was as if something was slightly off, as if something was wrong. And then, the little girl, as she walked, turned her head slightly and looked at David. And she did it. She raised her tiny hand to chest level, spread 4 fingers, folded her thumb into her palm, then slowly closed and opened her fingers. It was so simple, so silent. But David instantly recognized the gesture. The universal call for help. The silent cry women and children in danger used to secretly ask for help. For a moment, time seemed to slow again. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, and the cold that enveloped him was not the cold of the air, but the cold of realization. This couldn't have been a coincidence. That gesture could not have been just a random act. His eyes widened, his gaze sharpened. He started walking immediately, pushing through the crowd. He kept his eyes on the pair without losing sight of them. A luxury black car was waiting for them in the parking lot. The moment he saw them get in the car, David instinctively memorized the license plate. Then, he grabbed his radio, his voice calm but serious. Note the license plate. Urgent. Luxury black car. With a little girl. Call the police. Don't waste any time. As he finished speaking, a chill still crawled down his spine. At that moment, he spotted a colleague in the parking lot. Without a second thought, he ran towards him. "Buddy, can I borrow your car? It's an emergency, really important." Seeing the urgency in David's eyes, his colleague silently handed over the keys and got out of the car. David jumped into the driver's seat and fastened his seatbelt, his heart pounding out of his chest. He started the car and headed towards the parking lot exit. There was only one exit from the mall. If he missed it, he would lose track of the girl. Finally, he spotted the black car. They had just entered the intersection. David created some distance and began the pursuit. He wasn't just a security guard anymore. He had become someone acting on paternal instinct, someone who might change a child's life. He hoped nothing would happen before the police arrived, but at the same time, he was listening to the voice inside him. That little girl might really be in danger. And so, David, for perhaps the first time in his life, stepped outside the rules and decided to do what was right. This was no longer a duty. This was a matter of humanity. As the black car moved farther away from the city center, the roads began to clear, and the buildings were replaced by tall trees and estates surrounded by high walls. David kept a safe distance, never once taking his eyes off the car. Eventually, the vehicle entered through a large iron gate and headed toward a grand mansion. The security at the entrance seemed to already be aware, opening the gates instantly. David immediately pulled his car to the side of the road and took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't go past this boundary. It was off limits and dangerous. He grabbed his radio, his voice trembling but clear. "Police station. The target has entered the large estate grounds. I'm sending my location. Urgent support requested. There's a child in danger inside." When he hung up, he was acting solely on instinct. He drove his car around the back of the estate, heading toward the wooded area. Snow had silently covered everything, spreading like a white blanket over nature. The vehicle, moving along the dirt road, was able to get close to the mansion's borders without getting stuck in the snow. But it couldn't go any further. He turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The cold cut through him, and the snow crunched beneath his feet. The walls were high, and the foundations were solid. But David was in a mood where he had decided to disregard boundaries. He placed his hands on the stone wall, climbed, and pulled his body up, carefully glancing inside. Armed guards were patrolling the garden. Each one had a radio and looked professional. Entering this place seemed almost impossible, but David wasn't going back. At that moment, police sirens could be heard in the distance. Suddenly, the atmosphere grew tense. The security team went on high alert, the gates opened, and communication within the estate sped up. And then, the man David had seen at the mall stepped into the estate garden. He wore an expensive coat, but his face showed a mix of fear and anger. He couldn't hide his panic. Then, the little girl appeared. Mia. Her eyes were tearful. She was crying. Her red coat was partially wet with snow. The man grabbed her arm roughly and pulled her toward him. Mia wasn't resisting, but there was frozen terror on her face. She looked around once more. Maybe she was hoping for help, desperately. One of the guards quickly brought a vehicle to the estate entrance. The man forced the little girl into the car. At that moment, David jumped down from the wall, landing silently in the snow. He moved through the trees, slipping into the shadows. He tried to get as close as possible to the car without making a sound. He pressed his hand to his chest, feeling his heart beat uncontrollably, but his mind was clear. Time was running out. That girl's life was in his hands. And then the moment came. In the brief instant when no one was looking, David sprinted toward the car. He ran quickly through the snow and, in one swift motion, opened the driver's door and jumped inside. Everything happened in just a few seconds. The little girl's screams could be heard from inside the car. David started the engine. Just as he did, the sound of gunshots rang out. Several strikes hit the car windows, but the vehicle was bulletproof. The man and his guards were shouting, communicating over the radio. David gripped the steering wheel and pressed the gas pedal all the way down. The car shot forward with a sudden lurch. Inside, the girl was still screaming, shouting help. David quickly turned to her and yelled, "Calm down, Mia. I'm saving you. The police are on the way. Everything will be okay." The road was narrow and snowy, but the car was powerful. David aimed for the iron gates at the entrance, clenching his teeth as the crash moment approached, but he didn't even flinch. The gates splintered apart as the car broke through. With a loud noise, the vehicle managed to exit the estate and onto the road. Behind them, angry shouts, radio communications, and the roar of black SUVs could be heard as they pursued. The chase had begun. David didn't know the exact layout of the road ahead, but every instinct was focused on survival. In the rearview mirror, Mia's face appeared, her tears still flowing. But for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. As they turned corners along the snow-covered road, David counted 4 separate vehicles in pursuit. They all had armed men in them. No signaling, no braking, only forward. Then, the police sirens from afar grew closer. The approaching blue and red lights reflected off the snow. David's heart filled with relief. With one final effort, he steered the car toward the area where the police vehicles were. But the vehicles behind them hadn't given up. One SUV moved closer, trying to box David in. David jerked the wheel in a sharp movement, throwing the SUV off course. The vehicles collided, but David kept control. The police sirens were finally loud enough to hear. David reached out his hand to the girl, his voice still clear. "Hang in there, Mia, we're here. This nightmare is ending." He slammed the gas pedal toward the police cordon. As the vehicles behind him saw the lights, they began to slam on their brakes. David pressed the brakes as he entered the safe zone. The car skidded to a stop in the snow. The doors flew open, and armed police surrounded them from every side. David raised his hands and shouted, "There's a girl in the back seat. They were kidnapping her." The police quickly pulled Mia from the car and carried her to a safe area. The little girl was still crying, but now it was no longer out of fear, but the weight of her rescue. That night, a life was changed, and perhaps a man's life would never be the same again. The police quickly moved into action. Little Mia was safely placed in one of the vehicles. Her tears still streamed down her cheeks, but now, instead of weapons pointed at her, the people around her were positioned to protect her. In that moment, she curled up in the seat, perceiving things as only a child would. Then, David was placed into another police car. No weapons or handcuffs were involved, but there was a cautious seriousness in the officer's expressions. This extraordinary rescue needed an explanation, and everyone knew it. Snowflakes continued to fall as the night slowly descended on the police station. The vehicles had turned off their sirens, transitioning from emergency mode to normal procedure. When they arrived at the station, David was immediately taken to an interrogation room. The officers were polite but systematic. They gave him water, took his damp jacket to dry it. Then one of them entered, and the questions began. David recounted everything he had experienced, leaving not a single word out. How he had noticed the little girl's movements while on duty at the mall, the dropped toy, the moment their eyes met, the help sign she made, the luxury car, and the mansion follow-up. He explained it all. There wasn't a trace of doubt in his eyes. The radio recordings, the license plate, the first report made to the police. All of them supported David's accuracy. The detective's expressions slowly started to change. Yes, this man had gone beyond the rules. But why he did so was now very clear. Meanwhile, Mia was in a protected room of the child unit, accompanied by a female officer. At first, she was shy and full of fear. But slowly, the words came out of her mouth without being asked. "I want to stay with my mom," she said at first. Then more followed. "My mom was going to enroll me in school. But then one day, my uncle came. My mom cried. He put me in the car. I never saw her again." Her tears flowed once more. The officers began researching the information they had in the system. The man's identity, the so-called uncle who owned the mansion, was actually a former businessman. But there had been suspicious allegations about him before. A private security army, off-the-books dealings, and movements of wealth that didn't draw attention. He was now in custody. The mansion was completely under police blockade, and everything inside was being thoroughly examined. David, meanwhile, had slowly started to breathe easier in the interrogation room. The pounding in his chest lightened, and his eyes began to adjust to the dim light of the station. He saw that everything he had done was now making sense, not as a duty, but as a matter of conscience. As he sat quietly, an officer cracked the door open. Their eyes met. The officer smiled and nodded. "I'm glad you were there," he said briefly. David nodded his head. The only thought in his mind seemed to sum up the night. "I just did what was right." And in that moment, for the first time, he felt truly at peace. In the end, everything had come to light. What began that night at the police station, with unraveling details, had turned into a major scandal by the first light of day. Little Mia's story was not only a silent cry for help from a child, but also the key to unlocking a much darker world. The police's extensive investigations, private meetings with Mia's family, and the digital records uncovered about the mafia leader slowly began to form a clearer picture. Mia was, in fact, the only child of an extremely wealthy family. Her parents owned a large and influential holding company. For years, they had been in business with a man who appeared respectable in the corporate world but had dangerous connections lurking in the shadows. This man was the uncle Mia had referred to. She had seen him in their home, at meetings, and family dinners. She was familiar with his face, accustomed to his voice. However, the truth was far darker than this innocent perception. The man was, in fact, a mafia leader. He was the architect of the dark deals that flowed behind the company's facade. When Mia's father could no longer be a part of this system and tried to cancel some of the deals, things began to change. Partnerships suddenly turned into battles over power. Chaos erupted within the holding company. And it was during these times that Mia disappeared. The family quickly realized their daughter had been kidnapped. But going to the police was sadly not an option. The man wasn't just dangerous. He was extremely influential. He had infiltrated certain levels of the government and had friends within the judiciary. Every threat was aimed not only at Mia, but at the entire family. The first message to her father was clear: asterisk, your daughter is with us. If you involve the police, you'll never see her again. Asterisk, and so, they had stayed silent. They had bowed to the pressure. The family quietly hoped that Mia would one day be returned, that she would be set free without harm. But weeks went by, and with each passing day, hope faded a little more. Until David stood at the entrance of that mall. Until a little girl raised her hands, silently asking for help, looking directly into his eyes. David's instinct that night didn't just save a life. It also unmasked a powerful man. The police were now acting on evidence. The man had been arrested, and the other staff at the mansion were being questioned. Connections to an international criminal network were being investigated, and all the details of Mia's kidnapping process were being compiled into a file. As for Mia, she wasn't speaking like a child, but with a maturity far beyond her years. After enduring so much fear, this small heart had now found peace in her mother's arms. The mother, tears streaming down her face, clung to David's hands. Every word she said carried the same sentence: "You brought her back to me." At that moment, David didn't feel like a hero. He had just done what was right. But now he knew that tiny hand's silent plea for help wasn't just the cry of a child, but the desperate cry of a family fighting to hold on to life. And because he had listened to that cry, everything had changed forever. After the snowstorm night, David gradually returned to his life. Every morning, he would put on his uniform again, patrolling the security points of the shopping mall. What happened that night was still vivid in his mind, but life went on. The bright corridors of the mall, the shoppers, the laughter of children, everything seemed normal, just like that day. But today, something was different. Two black, luxury cars pulled up in front of the mall. David was used to such cars arriving. After all, the mall housed the city's most expensive stores. But when he saw who stepped out of the vehicles, his gaze froze. The door opened, and Laura Miller stepped out with elegant, determined strides. The holding partner, Mia's mother. A mother, and also a powerful representative of a vast empire. Laura walked directly toward David. Her eyes reflected both gratitude and determination. "Hello, David," she said softly but seriously. "We need to talk." David paused for a moment, then gathered himself. "Is your daughter okay, ma'am?" he asked. Laura slightly tilted her head. "Yes, thanks to you." There was a silence. Then Laura asked, "What time do you finish today, David?" David, still unsure of what was going on, answered, 5 o'clock. Laura nodded and smiled. "Then, let me pick you up. Shall we have dinner?" David smiled politely, curious but respectful. "Of course," he said. At 5 o'clock that day, as promised, a luxury car was waiting in front of the mall to pick him up. The driver opened the door. When David sat down, he still didn't fully understand what was happening. The car took him to one of the city's finest restaurants. When he stepped inside, Laura was waiting for him. There was only a two-person setting at the table. After a brief greeting, Laura got straight to the point. "David, you saved my only possession. My daughter," she said, looking him in the eyes. and I've looked into who you are. I didn't just want to thank you. I wanted to get to know you. Because, to be honest, you're too brave and too capable to be just a mall security guard." David felt a little embarrassed and looked away. "I just did what I had to." But Laura maintained her seriousness as she continued. "I insist on offering you the position of head of security for our family and our holding company. Your salary will be credited before you even start. You'll have a good home. A car will be prepared for you. Please accept my offer, David. This isn't just a thank you. It's a real need." David was shocked. He didn't know what to say at first. His thoughts scattered. But then something came to his mind. His daughter, her future, the chance to give her a better life, a safer, more peaceful life. He raised his head and looked at Laura. "I didn't save your daughter for money." Laura smiled. "I know. No one can imitate courage, David. And that's why I want to make you head of security. Because you truly deserve it. Not only for us, but many children in this world need someone like you." David nodded. His eyes were filled with emotion, but there was a strong pride within him. "Thank you," he said quietly. Laura placed her hand over her heart. "I will be indebted to you for the rest of my life." After a moment of silence, David thought again. He asked one final question. "Mia, she's so young. Where did she learn that sign?" Laura took a deep breath, smiled, but there was a trace of pain in her eyes. In some families, children are considered lucky. But Mia had to learn that symbol when she was 5. "I taught her. Because in this world, it's not easy to trust anyone, David. But having you around, it will make me feel safe." That evening, David accepted the offer. He was now living in a luxury apartment. He could see his daughter whenever he wanted and show her the best sides of life. His car, salary, and prestigious title were of course important. But for David, there was something far more valuable. He had earned this change in his life. Because sometimes, a life can change in an instant. And sometimes, the hand you extend to someone else will save you too. The cries for help that we don't turn a blind eye to can change not only someone else's destiny, but ours as well. Because the virtue of helping others is one of the greatest virtues. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. You can support our channel by clicking the join button. Thank you.